My name is Marcus. I'm 37 years old now, and I need to tell you about something that happened to me 5 years ago at my cabin in upstate New York. Something that changed everything I thought I knew about safety. Something that made me realize that isolation isn't always peaceful. Sometimes isolation means no one can hear you scream. If you love true horror stories about real survival and creeping dread, hit like and subscribe right now. And keep listening, because the night I heard tapping on my cabin window will teach you that sometimes the things we fear most are the things we fail to see coming until it's almost too late. I need to start by telling you who I was and why I did what I did. I've always loved the quiet. Ever since I was a kid, I was the type of person who preferred solitude over social situations. While my friends were out partying and making memories, I was content to be alone with my thoughts. Some people might call it antisocial. I call it peace. 5 years ago, when I was 32 years old, I made the decision to move up to a little cabin in rural upstate New York. I was working remotely as a software developer, which meant I could work from anywhere. I could work from the middle of nowhere if I wanted to. And I did want to. I left behind the chaos of the city, the noise, the crowds, the constant stimulation. The cabin was everything I had been looking for. It was big, really big, much bigger than I needed for one person. It was secluded. The woods stretched out far beyond my property. Miles and miles of forest in every direction. The nearest neighbor was actually miles away. I could barely see their property line from my window. The only sounds you could hear were the wind in the trees and the occasional bird chirping in the distance. It was peaceful. That's exactly how I liked it. I spent most of my time on the lake that sat just behind my house. Fishing was my thing. I loved fishing. I would wake up early, get my coffee, and head out onto the water. I would spend hours out there just casting my line and waiting. There's something meditative about fishing, something that clears your mind. The cabin had a huge deck that looked out over the woods. I often sat out there in the evenings with a cold beer in my hand, watching the sun dip behind the trees. I would listen to the nighttime sounds of the woods, the crickets, the frogs, the occasional owl calling out. It was always peaceful, always calm, until it wasn't. It started about 2 weeks before everything went wrong. I was on the deck like usual. It was a Saturday evening. The sun was just starting to set. The sky was turning orange and pink and purple. I was sitting there in my chair with a beer in my hand, just staring into the darkening forest, when I heard something. A snap of a twig in the distance. I didn't think much of it. Deer, maybe, or a raccoon. The woods are full of life. I'd gotten used to the noises over the 5 years I'd been living there. Every sound became background noise eventually. Snap, crack, rustle. It was all just part of living in the woods. But as the days went by, the sounds became more frequent. At first, it was just that twig snapping or leaves rustling. Things I thought were just animals, normal forest noises. But then one night I heard something different. A scratching sound. It came from the side of the house, somewhere near the window of the spare bedroom. It was quiet, almost like it was trying to be sneaky, like whatever was making the sound didn't want me to hear it. I stood up from my chair. My heart was pounding a little faster than usual. I waited, but nothing came after that. I told myself it was probably just a squirrel. Squirrels scratch on wood. That's what they do, but something didn't feel right about it. I decided to go inside and lock up for the night. I went through the cabin systematically. Front door, locked. Back door, locked. Windows, all locked. I checked the spare bedroom window specifically, the one where I had heard the scratching. It was locked tight. Nothing could get through there. I went to bed, but I couldn't stop thinking about the sound. That scratching. It sounded intentional somehow, like something or someone was trying to get my attention. But I was alone out here, miles from anyone who would try to scratch at my window. What animal makes that kind of sound? The next evening I heard it again. The scratching. It wasn't just at the side of the house anymore. Now it was closer. It sounded like it was coming from right outside the spare bedroom window. I froze. I was in the living room reading a book, and I just froze with the book in my hands. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. My nerves were starting to fray. I couldn't explain it, but something felt off. The scratching sound was different from the night before. It was more deliberate, more focused, like whatever was making the sound knew exactly where it wanted to scratch. I went to the window, pulling the curtains back slightly to see what was outside. The moonlight illuminated the tree near the house. It was casting long shadows across the yard. The wind was still. Everything seemed normal. I didn't see any animal. I didn't see any person. Nothing was out there. I shook my head and told myself that I was just letting my imagination run wild. It was probably just a branch brushing up against the window. Or maybe the wind was moving something against the glass. I convinced myself that there wasn't anything to worry about and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the house sounded louder than usual. Every gust of wind outside seemed to have intention. I was jumping at shadows. I was being paranoid. That's what I told myself. Paranoid. The next night, the scratching returned. It wasn't just scratching anymore, though. It sounded like light tapping, like someone was tapping on the window with their fingers. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone was trying to get my attention. Like someone was trying to communicate with me. My heart skipped a beat and I jumped out of bed. I grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand and crept through the dark hallway toward the spare bedroom. The floorboards creaked with each step. In the silence of the cabin, those creaks sounded incredibly loud, like an alarm announcing my location. When I reached the window, I shone the flashlight outside. I was bracing myself for what I might see. A face, a figure, someone standing in the darkness. But there was nothing there. No person, no animal, just the same empty woods. The light from my flashlight illuminated the trees, but I couldn't see anything moving out there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I couldn't explain it, but something was wrong. The air around me felt thick, heavy, like something invisible was pressing down on me. Like the atmosphere itself had changed. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every little noise seemed louder. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like someone was moving around in the house. Every gust of wind outside sounded like breathing. I stayed awake, listening to the sounds of the night. I was listening for something specific now. That tapping, that scratching. Eventually, I fell asleep out of sheer exhaustion. My body just shut down. I couldn't fight sleep anymore. The nights went on, and the sounds didn't stop. I would hear them every night. Always the same pattern. A tap, a scratch. Sometimes even a faint whisper that seemed to come from within the walls, from inside the cabin itself. The whispers were the worst part. They were so quiet I could barely hear them. So quiet I couldn't tell if they were real or if I was imagining them. A week went by, then 2 weeks. The sounds were getting more intense, more frequent. I wasn't sleeping well. I was waking up multiple times each night. I would lie in bed with my heart pounding, listening to the sounds, trying to figure out what they meant. Who was making them? Why were they making them? I was starting to lose it a little bit. I was second-guessing myself. Was something actually out there, or was I just being paranoid? Was the isolation getting to me? Was my mind playing tricks on me? I had always enjoyed being alone, but now the solitude felt suffocating. It felt like it was closing in on me. One night I decided that I had to confront whatever was causing these sounds. Maybe it was just an animal, I thought. Maybe a raccoon had found its way inside. Maybe a squirrel. Maybe a deer. Maybe something was nesting in the walls. I needed to know. I couldn't take the not knowing anymore. I grabbed a crowbar from the shed out back. I figured it might be a good idea to have something in my hand. Something heavy, something I could use if things got weird. If whatever was in my house wasn't an animal. I went to the spare bedroom and carefully opened the door. The air inside felt stale, like it hadn't been touched in ages. I hadn't used the room in months. It was just a guest room that I never had guests in. Nobody ever visited me out here. I was alone. I shone the flashlight around the room slowly. I was checking every corner, under the bed, behind the dresser, in the corners. Nothing. There was nothing in the room. It was empty. Just the same old room I remembered. I stood there for a minute, feeling like an idiot. There was nothing there. It was just my imagination. I was being stupid. I was being paranoid. There was no reason to be afraid, but as I turned to leave, I noticed something. The closet door was slightly ajar. I don't remember leaving it that way. I don't remember opening it. The closet had been closed the last time I was in here. I was sure of it. My stomach dropped. A sensation of dread washed over me. I slowly walked over to the closet and pulled open the door. I was preparing myself for what I might find. A figure. A person. Someone hiding in there waiting for me. The closet was empty. But as I shone the flashlight into the back corner of the closet, I saw something strange. A small piece of cloth. It was caught on the edge of the wall. It was dark, torn, almost like a piece of clothing, like someone had ripped their clothes trying to squeeze through something. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't think straight. My mind was racing. Was someone here? Had someone been inside my house, inside my closet? How long had they been in here? Had they been watching me? I backed out of the room slowly. My hand was gripping the crowbar so tightly my knuckles had turned white. My heart was thudding in my chest. Every sound seemed magnified. Every shadow seemed like a threat. I slammed the door shut and bolted it. I couldn't stay in that house another second. I felt like the walls were closing in on me, like someone was watching me from the darkness, like eyes were following my every move. I went outside, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. But the darkness of the woods felt like it was closing in on me too. The trees seemed taller, the shadows seemed deeper. The sounds of the forest seemed more ominous. An owl hooted and I jumped. A branch cracked and I spun around, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just my nerves. Maybe the isolation was getting to me. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't there. Maybe that piece of cloth was just something that had been there for months. Something I had forgotten about. I slept on the couch that night with a baseball bat within reach. I didn't hear anything. No scratching, no tapping, no whispers. It was quiet, almost too quiet. The silence was almost worse than the sounds. At least with the sounds I knew something was there. With the silence I didn't know anything. The next night, I decided to be brave. I was going to stay in my bed, and I wasn't going to let whatever this was drive me out of my own house. I was going to face whatever was happening. I wasn't going to run anymore. But just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard it again. The tap, tap, tap against the window. The same tapping I had heard before. But this time it was louder, more insistent, like whoever was out there was getting impatient. I jumped up. Heart racing, my body moving on pure adrenaline now. I grabbed the flashlight and ran to the spare bedroom, not caring how loud my footsteps were this time. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I wasn't going to be afraid. When I pulled back the curtain, I didn't just see the woods. I saw a shadow. Someone standing just outside the window, barely visible in the dim light, but definitely there. Definitely real. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't my mind playing tricks on me. I froze, my blood running cold. The figure was tall. Impossibly tall, impossibly thin. It was just standing there, watching, staring at me through the glass. I turned around, my mind spinning. Who was that? What were they doing here? Why were they watching me? I didn't want to believe it, but there was no denying it now. Someone had been outside my house. Someone had been watching me. Someone was trying to get inside. I ran to the phone in the kitchen. My hands were shaking so much that I could barely dial, but I managed to get the numbers right. 911. The operator answered, and I could barely speak. I was panicking. My voice was shaking. I told her someone had been outside my house. I told her I think they're still here. I told her I think they're trying to get inside. She asked me questions, but I could barely answer them. I gave her my address. My hands were still shaking. She told me officers would be sent right away. She told me to stay on the line. I hung up because I needed to get out. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. Not with someone outside. Not with someone trying to get in. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the back door. But as I turned to grab my jacket, I heard something from the hallway. A slow creak. Someone was moving through the house. Someone was inside. They had gotten in. They were in my house. I didn't hesitate. I ran for the back door, flinging it open and tearing through the woods. I ran as fast as I could, not stopping to look back. My lungs were burning with every step. The branches were scratching at my face. But I kept running. By the time I made it to the edge of the property, I could see the flashing lights of the police cars in the distance. Blue and red lights cutting through the darkness. I slowed down. My body was trembling. I was breathless. I was terrified. I hid behind a tree watching the officers arrive at the house. They had their guns drawn. They were searching the place. They went inside. Minutes passed, then 10 minutes, then 20. But I didn't stick around to find out what happened. I couldn't. I knew that whatever or whoever had been in that house wasn't done. I wasn't safe there anymore. That cabin was no longer my sanctuary. It had become my prison. I followed up with the police the next day to let them know I was all right. So there wouldn't be a search out for me. But they told me something that made my blood run cold. They didn't find anyone in the house. They searched every room, every closet, every corner. They found the piece of cloth in the spare bedroom closet. They found signs that someone had been trying to get in through the basement, but they didn't find the person. That person was still out there, still in those woods, still watching, still waiting. The cabin is still there, sitting alone in the woods, but it doesn't feel like home anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the tapping sounds. Every time I'm alone, I feel like someone is watching me. I don't know who was in my house or what they wanted, but I know one thing for sure. They were waiting for me. And they're still out there,